should like to preface the reading of the scripture with this short statement. I'm obliged today to change the subject announced in the bulletin and postpone that for some other time. That occasionally happens to me, that having to announce a subject early in the week for the bulletin and find that by the time arrives I can't deliver. And especially this week, because I've been, I think, a little more absent-minded than usual. It isn't very often that I leave this church for a full week in the winter months. I think only once before in 26 years have I done it. But 2 years ago I received an invitation to deliver the Quillian lectures in Emory University. A rather formidable assignment. I postponed it for 1 year and almost for the second. I had a good deal of hesitation and reluctance, not because I didn't appreciate the very great honor in it, but partly because I didn't feel adequate to it, and partly because I just never leave this church for a full week in the winter time. But I'm grateful to you and especially to Mr. Rutland for making it possible, and now that I have it out of my system, I feel better about it. But you're going to have to be real patient with me for a little while I catch my breath. In the language of the track coach, I ran so hard to get to that goal that I am temporarily and I guess figuratively out of breath. However, this morning I want to begin a series of sermons running through the next few weeks on some basic convictions in our faith. The general topic this morning, rebuilding a lost faith. And I am convinced that for many people, that is a central problem, rebuilding a lost faith. And I want to read for a scriptural background one of the Psalms, which a man is frankly expressing his feeling. It's one beautiful thing about the Psalms. These people, when they had a doubt in their mind and unbelief in their heart, they did not hold it in. They expressed it. They spoke it out, and thus were healed of the thing that troubled them. It's a therapy that we all could learn. Here's a man deeply in trouble about his faith. I cry aloud to God. I cry to God to listen. I turn to the Lord in the hour of my need. I stretch my hands out ceaselessly, refusing to be comforted. I moan as I remember God. I muse upon him till I faint. All night I never close my eyes. I am so troubled I cannot speak. I dwell on days of old. I recall the years gone by, thinking to myself at night, musing in my inward quest. Will the Lord forever discard us? Will he never be kind again? Has his love left us forever? Has his faithfulness utterly failed? Has God forgotten to be gracious? Has he in anger stopped his pity? Yes, this is my grief, that the Most High no longer has the strength he had. But I will remember. Let me recall what the Eternal did. Let me remember thy wonders of old. Let me think of all that thou hast done and muse upon thy deeds. Thy dealings were divine, O God. What God was great like unto thee, rescuing thy people by thy power, the sons of Jacob and Joseph, leading thy people like a flock by the hand of Moses and Aaron? Thou art a God of wonders. Thou dost show the world thy strength. Here in this 77th Psalm, there is a man frankly expressing his inner doubt. This is my grief, he said, that the Most High no longer has the strength he had. Certainly the man who said that was no atheist. He wanted to believe, wanted with all his heart to believe, hold his faith, keep his trust. But the thing was just slipping away from him. And he said, in effect, this is my grief, this is my trouble. God is fading out. He just isn't as big or as powerful as once he was in the life of men. Well, now that pretty well says it for many. That's the 20th century atheism. The old-fashioned atheism, loud-mouthed, arrogant, belligerent atheism of yesterday has pretty well disappeared. Time was, you know, when Robert Ingersoll brand of atheism was quite popular, fashionable. The 4 A's were almost as numerous then as the AA's now. The American Association for the Advancement of Atheism. There were Ingersoll clubs in nearly every city, one on nearly every college campus. It was smart. Atheism was in vogue. Colonel Bob would come to town, hire the town hall, lecture on the mistakes of Moses, charge $2 a seat, give the local ministers' association heart failure, hold a watch in his hand on stage saying, God, if there be a God, strike me dead within the minute, and stand there in the silence while the seconds ticked off. Old ladies used to faint, and Colonel Bob cut quite a dash. But who today would pay $2 to hear any man disprove God or discuss the mistakes of Moses? The market has played out for that particular brand of oratory. I think principally because it was mostly negative. It took away something, put nothing in its place. The mistakes of Moses were minor in comparison with the barren emptiness of atheism. Something is back of life, something, not chance, something, for which negative atheism had no satisfying answer, and thus disqualified itself in the minds of thoughtful people as a contender for the minds of men. There are not many outright atheists today. Most people have no difficulty at all believing in the existence of God. Polls have been taken periodically across the country, and all of them show that 98% plus of our people believe in a supreme power back of life. Yet there is unbelief, a heap of it. It has only changed its form, that's all. The atheism of our age is marked not so much by the cocksure arrogance of yesterday as by an uneasy feeling that God has diminished in the minds of men, faded out, lost his power. Whatever he used to mean in the minds of men, he no longer has the strength he had. And people today would listen to all the standard arguments for the existence of God, cosmological, teleological, ontological, those arguments that were used so effectively a generation ago in proof of God. They would listen to all the arguments and still turn away disappointed, saying like this psalmist, "That is not our trouble. We have no difficulty believing in God's existence. This is our grief, that the Most High no longer has the strength he had. For us and for all mankind, he is getting far away." So my sermon this morning is not an argument for the existence of God, as though by argument we could prove him or disprove him. My purpose is more modest. It is to trace, if we can, the subtle sources of doubt, the kind of unbelief that's in our own minds, with the hope that by frankly facing them, we can understand them and get rid of them as the psalmist did. You see how he climbed back to faith. By the simple device of facing his doubts frankly, getting his questions up into the open, going back to the place where faith got dim, and picking up the threads of remembrance. "I will remember," he said, "I will call to remembrance the works of the Lord. I will call to my mind, my memory, my song in the night." Let's begin with the mind. Mental unbelief, intellectual unbelief. There's a heap of it. It's not the most important. The sense of God has faded out in the minds of some who have never made or faced the necessity of making an intellectual adjustment to new knowledge, new facts, the new vastness of the universe which in modern life science has been gradually unfolding. I say let's begin with that, though it is by no means the most important. Young people in college, I think, are troubled about it more than the rest of us, I suppose because in their classroom day after day they're compelled to think about it more than the rest of us. And I have talked to some who have gathered the impression somehow that what the minister says on Sunday is denied by what scientists say the rest of the week. Certainly they're not atheists. They believe in the existence of God. They want to believe. But what about these facts? And to be Christian in this generation, which more than any generation before it is nature conscious, tinkering with its laws and harnessing its forces, we must have a gospel adequate to meet the skepticism that looks up through the eyes of young people who in their classroom day after day are having a hard time, some of them, getting the Bible and biology together, the Rock of Ages and the Age of Rocks. In almost every instance, the crux of the conflict is right here. They are trying to fit the old medieval concept of God into this new modern framework. You see, their knowledge of God, the Creator, has not kept pace with their growing knowledge of His creation. And they're trying to bring over into this new and scientific framework a concept of God, not big enough to fit the facts. Now, I say some of you have no trouble with this at all, but I think it is mostly because you've stopped thinking about it. That's one good way, to free the mind of doubt. Don't think. A lot of people have stopped there. They don't think. It's an enormous leap when you stop to think of it. Between the world of yesterday, the world of the medievalists who took it for granted that the earth was the center because it was the home of man, to the world of Galileo and Copernicus and others who began to show that it was not the center, but a tiny part of an illimitable vastness. Not easily do our minds grasp these new facts. With the coming of the telescope 300 years ago, and then the spectroscope, and now these electronic eyes that make Galileo's little glass seem like a child's play toy. That sense of immensity has grown beyond calculation, and our minds have simply not caught up with it. Not easily do our minds grasp these incredible facts that this old world that seems so solid to our eyes is not solid, a swirling mass of electrons, mostly space. Not easily do our minds adjust to it, that this old world that seems so big to our eyes is not big, just a tiny speck of stardust whirling around a minor sun, lost in a billion other suns. The whole thing so immense that any attempt to even picture it defies imagination and dissolves the medieval God into a vague abstraction. And with every new insight, with every new projection of man's mind into these distances, that sense of immensity grows and grows. And under its impact, oddly enough, has come a diminishing sense of God. The idea that God can be concerned about individuals, that he can care, that he can know what happens to people one by one. Now, it's strange reasoning, I know, when you stop to think it through, that the bigger we find the universe to be, the less important its creator. That's silly logic. That the moment we get these new eyes to see the growing wonders of creation and the great design around us, we begin to bow out the great designer. That's silly logic. You'd think it would work the other way. The bigger we prove the universe to be, the mightier the power back of it. That what we are seeing now more and more with these new eyes about the wonders of creation should drive us to our knees in wonder and praise and glory with the majesty and power of him who rules and reigns in it. And as for the nearness of God to us, you'd think no one would doubt that anymore. For we're looking now into a world of atoms. Down in the invisible atom, in a world so small we cannot even see, where time is measured not by seconds but by microseconds, the trillionth part of a second, we see his unbelievable concern for detail, an incredible order and precision down in a world we cannot even see. If these mighty galaxies around us are but the expression of his thought, the fringes of his ways, the work of his fingers, and if the precision of the atom is the sample of his concern for tiny things, what kind of God is this? Great God of wonders, all thy ways are matchless, godlike and divine. You'd think we'd be more humble. Understand that it's our ignorance, not our knowledge, that would lose God in such a world. I have a little verse here that I think points the way pretty well. A boy was born mid little things, between a little world and sky, and knew not of the cosmic rings round which the circling planets fly. He lived in little works and thoughts where little ventures grow and plod, and paced and plowed his little plots, and prayed unto his little God. But as the mighty system grew, his faith grew faint with many scars. The cosmos widened in his view, but God was lost among the stars. Another boy in lowly days as he to little things was born. He gathered lore in woodland ways and from the glory of the morn. As wider skies broke on his view, God greatened in his growing mind. Each year he dreamed his God anew and left the lesser God behind. He saw the boundless scheme dilate in star and atom, sky and clod. And as the universe grew great, he dreamed for it a greater God. Now, let's go on to something, if not more important, at least more immediate. There are those in whose consciousness the sense of God has diminished under the pressure of bitter experience. They are shaken in their faith, not by the immensity of life's mystery, but by the immensity of its tragedy. The cruelty of the world has driven God from their thoughts. Reading in Job one day, in one of the newer translations, I came across this verse. People should be kind to a despairing man, or he will give up faith in the Almighty. How true that is. Often people lose faith in God when they lose faith in people. In a loveless atmosphere, in an atmosphere without mercy, without kindness, you have a prolific breeding ground for atheism and unbelief. God is driven from the thoughts of men, often by man. The inhumanity to man, the reason today that many people in the world believe so little in divine love is that in their lifetime they have seen so little human love. The frightened people, the displaced people, the pushed around people of the world, who have lived through decades of conflict and strife and haven't seen much kindness or gentleness. How hard it must be for them to believe that God cares. Part of the aftermath of every war is a fresh outbreak of unbelief, atheism. Why? Well, partly because God has to be put out of mind in order to kill successfully. And partly because of the tragedy and bitterness and sorrow and sin that follow in the wake of war. Think of the German people today, who for 2 generations have known nothing else but war. Thinking, planning, waging war, or recovering from war. Exposed for decades to a heartless, merciless order of existence in which every decent human thing has been stripped from life, as Judge Sebring told us so forcibly about on Friday night. Compelled to follow leaders who set out cynically, systematically, scientifically to exterminate other men as callously as a butcher slaughters an animal, or by sadistic torture experiment with human beings to see how much they can take before they die, how much poison, how much pain, and taking human skin and using it as we take the skin of animals to make lampshades. It's incredible. How could people come through a thing like that and believe in God? One young German said, we are the lost people. We have become a wasteland. We're a burned out people. Forlorn like children, experienced like old men, bitter, hard, insensitive. We are the lost people. We don't believe in anything. Well, now the struggle through which our whole generation has passed has brutalized us all, more than we know, perhaps. Left us cynical, callous, insensitive. Yes, we are. We're insensitive. We don't even hear the cry that comes into us from all the corners of the earth. We're insensitive. With the devil of frustration lurking in everything we do. So that in a world without mercy and without kindness, people look up like the psalmist, where is God? This is our grief. God has faded out of the minds of men. Well, you see, you can't deal with that kind of doubt with an argument. There's just no sense in going to despairing people saying, here are the reasons, 1, 2, 3, for believing in God. They'll never be won to faith by an argument. The road back to faith for large areas of the human race now is where the psalmist put it, by way of remembrance. People should be kind to despairing men, or they will give up faith in the Almighty. It's about the first thing that the church needs to remember now. With these endless appeals coming in from everywhere, to remember that in the experience through which they have been passing, millions of our fellow human beings have been conditioned for atheism, conditioned for communism, conditioned by despair. And they're not likely to find God again or believe in Him again until they can come to believe in people, until they can have their faith restored and their confidence restored in people. They're not worrying about the mistakes of Moses. They're concerned now about the mistakes of their own leaders and the vicious social forces which have produced such a heartless order of existence. And they're not likely to believe in God again until they can see some expression of God, some kindness of God expressed in people. Until some people somewhere break through the vicious circle. And by their sympathy and compassion, make them feel through the smoke screen of fear and distrust and suspicion, make them feel again the compassion of God. God has set the church in the world to do just that, to be the medium of his compassion, to make people feel through human love the winsome pull of divine love. That's why every dollar put into Christian missions now is so important for the future. Why I'm hoping that here in our church we are getting ourselves ready for the one great hour on that Sunday when we do try to make people on the other side of the world feel the compassion of God through our compassion. And it is why the Christian church, with its compassion and concern, does far more to combat communism in the long run than congressional committees with their big headlines and loud talk. Friends, people should be kind to the despairing man, or he will give up faith in the Almighty. That's the sociological source of doubt. Now we must go still deeper to the most prolific source of modern doubt. Here we've been talking about the kind of doubt that requires intellectual adjustment and emotional adjustment. But most of our doubt is neither. Not mental, not emotional, but moral. Rooted in twisted living and shabby conduct. Most of our unbelief, after all, is in the heart, not in the head. It flatters our pride to think that our unbelief comes out of our mental honesty. The reason we can't believe is because we're too mentally honest to believe. And by a certain superior intelligence and goodness on our part, we can point out the flaw in things, in the Bible, the mistakes of Moses, and in the church, the hypocrisy of Christians. And we like to think that unbelief is something in the head. Down deep in our hearts, we know where our real trouble is. Most of it is in the way we live and in the way we want to live. Our conduct conditions our belief far more than our belief conditions our conduct. We live ourselves into bad thinking far more than we think ourselves into bad living. I like to illustrate that, and it isn't hard at all. Going back to the Old Testament, there's a story of a man who was having some trouble about brotherhood. Cain murdered his brother Abel. And with that, his mind clouded by that evil thing, that murder. Trying to justify himself, he said, am I my brother's keeper? How could he believe in brotherhood, having murdered his brother? Or come down into the New Testament. Pilate played politics with truth, threw Jesus to the wolves to save his own skin, played politics with truth, then sarcastically asked, what is truth? How could he believe in truth, standing there mutilating truth? Or come down a little closer home. Our forefathers were slave owners, and they argued that the Negro race was an inferior race. They had to get some philosophy to justify the deed. So they argued that. They argued it so well they convinced themselves. They came actually to believe it. I have a friend who says of a certain political leader, he says a thing 3 times, and if nobody contradicts it, he thinks it's the truth. Well, they said it back there 3 times. They said it so well they convinced themselves. And they argued it so much that they put that false idea into tradition, into custom, into all these Jim Crow laws, and into the very atmosphere we breathe. Now, they didn't reach the belief and then go out and buy slaves. They bought slaves and then reached the belief. What we do and want to do determines what we believe far more than what we believe determines what we do. Which is just another way of saying what I've said. That most unbelief is in the heart, not in the head. The fool has said in his heart, there is no God. Well, what does it mean? We're talking about rebuilding a lost faith. It means that the road back to faith for most people is not intellectual, but moral. It's a path the heart must walk. With the heart man believeth unto righteousness. Paul said that. Jesus said it too. How often and in how many ways? He that hath an ear to hear, let him hear. He's not going to hear if he has no ears for it. If any man will to do the Father's will, he shall know. You can find faith all right if you walk the moral path. Blessed are the pure in heart, they shall see. The road to faith for most people is moral. Well, for myself, I know what it is. I know that when I get low in faith, when for me God gets far away and the face of the Father dim, I know what I must do. I deliberately set myself to do something God-like. I seek to know His will through Christ, who is the supreme revelation of His will. And I try to do something Christ-like, something that I think God would do. And faith comes back and shines again and lifts me to my feet. Well, we learn that out of the New Testament. It was made dramatically vivid a few years ago in a charming story. It was put in a book and later put into a movies, The Man Who Played God. You remember it? I like that story. I know it's faulted at points, but I like it because in it is the hint of the exciting possibility of what can happen to all of us. You remember? It revolves around a musician, an American musician, who played a command performance one night before a king, and someone threw a bomb into the building in an effort to kill the king. And in the explosion, the musician was deafened, lost his hearing, never heard again. And with his musical career utterly destroyed, he came back to New York in bitterness and brokenness of heart. He would not be consoled. Again and again, an old and good friend tried to talk to him, tried to persuade him that God had not forsaken him. One day took down the New Testament, pushed his finger through a passage he had always believed, "Are not two sparrows sold for a farthing, yet not one is forgotten before the Lord." The musician sat there weeping bitterly. "It isn't true," he said, "not a word of it. God, if there be a God, knows nothing about any of us." Later he was induced to take up lip reading so he could understand the people who talked to him. And he became wonderfully proficient in it. He could watch people's lips and understand their speech just as well as if he heard. He lived in a flat overlooking Central Park, and day after day passed the time there, watching through powerful field glasses the pageantry of life that passed outside his window. He began to be interested in people. One day he saw a sick, pale young man come into the park with a slip of a girl on his arm. The young man was crying. And with his glasses he listened to their conversation. He read the boy's lips and heard his story. He was telling his girl that he had been to the doctor and heard the sentence of death. Tuberculosis, the doctor said, and no hope. "Oh," he said, "I could be cured. The doctor said if I could go to the country, go to the mountains. That's funny, if I could go to the mountains." The musician acted on impulse, sent his companion out into the park to tell the young people on the park bench that someone deeply interested in them, and yet who didn't want his name known, would like very much the privilege of sending him to the mountains. Through the glasses he watched the reaction. Stunned surprise at first, then unbelief, and then the light of hope and joy. He got such a thrill out of it that he began watching more closely the procession, particularly of the troubled people who came within his view. And more as he watched, he found himself watching for the chance to play God, as he called it, to answer the prayers. And more he forgot himself and his trouble as he entered into theirs, and unconsciously as he mingled with the people and lived in their lives, took their burdens on himself to share, to heal. He healed himself and the deep hurt in his heart. And he found himself talking to God as naturally as he talked to his companion. "Look, God," he would say. "Look," he would shout excitedly. "Look, you and I can answer that prayer." I say it's a good story. It's faulted at points, I know. But it's a good story because it's the hint of the exciting possibility of what can happen to all of us. It's a good story because it's a true story. I mean by that it happens. It's happening all the time. It's how people build faith. You want to do that? You want God to come out of the abstract into the real. You want him to be the companion of the road. You want him to walk with you and know that he's there. There's no miracle to it. There's no magic in it. Let's say it reverently. Try it a while. Play God. See what happens. Seek to know his will through Christ who reveals his will. Then act like him. Enter sympathetically and in a Christ-like way into the lives of people around. Faith will take care of itself. You don't have to pray for faith. Faith comes by indirection. Faith comes by the process of learning the will of God and doing it. We could take up his own fine phrase and paraphrase it. Seek, he said, the kingdom of God. Seek it first. And all these things, even faith, will be added unto you. Let's stand, please. Unite our hearts, O Lord, in the love wherewith thou hast loved us since the world began. Hold our hearts in tune with thy heart, and all our wayward wills to thine. Heal the hurts and cure the sins that separate us, man from man, nation from nation. Help us to rise above all littleness of soul in the great generosity and goodness of thy love. The grace of the Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God the Father, the fellowship and communion of his Holy Spirit, rest and abide with you now and evermore.